Knowledge weighs nothing. The most robust survival kit in the world is not the one strapped to your back, but the one stored between your ears. Novice adventurers obsess over the weight of their gear, counting every ounce of nylon and steel, yet they often overlook the only resource that truly weighs zero. Physical tools have a fundamental weakness. A lighter runs out of fuel, a knife blade snaps, and a GPS unit runs out of batteries. If your ability to stay alive is tied entirely to objects, your safety is fragile. You are effectively renting your survival from a manufacturer. The moment those items are lost or broken, you revert to helplessness. Knowledge operates differently. It is immune to the elements and cannot be left behind on a trail. If you understand the physics of friction, the forest floor becomes your lighter. If you understand the geometry of the constellations, the night sky becomes your map. This philosophy prioritizes software over hardware. Instead of buying a better water filter, you learn how to construct a solar still. Instead of carrying a heavier tent, you learn to weave a debris hut. This accumulation of skill allows you to travel lighter and faster, moving through the wilderness with confidence rather than fear. You could lose everything you own in a river crossing, and unlike the person who relied on their backpack, you would walk out onto the bank still fully equipped to survive. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. The fastest way to fail in a life or death situation is to try to move quickly. In the adrenaline-fueled chaos of a car crash or a wilderness emergency, the urge to rush is overwhelming, but speed without precision is just a recipe for disaster. This is where the tactical philosophy of slow is smooth, smooth is fast saves lives. When you panic, your body dumps cortisol and adrenaline into your system. While this makes you strong, it destroys your fine motor skills. Your hands shake, your vision tunnels, and your coordination vanishes. If you try to sprint through a complex task, like applying a tourniquet or striking a ferro rod, you will inevitably fumble. You drop the lighter, you tear the bandage, you tie the knot wrong. Every mistake forces you to stop, reset, and start over. These corrections eat up precious seconds that you do not have. The solution is to force yourself to move at a pace that feels uncomfortably slow. You deliberately pick up the tool. You consciously guide your hand. By focusing on smoothness, you eliminate the friction of error. You get the action right on the first try. This efficiency creates an illusion of speed. A surgeon who moves with calm, fluid deliberation finishes the operation faster than the one who is frantically rushing and making small tears. In survival and in life, the person who skips the fumble is the one who crosses the finish line first. You slow down to ensure you never have to stop. Strategic silence. The most valuable asset in any conflict is information, and the moment you open your mouth, you are giving it away for free. Strategic silence is the discipline of treating your words like a limited supply of ammunition that must be rationed rather than sprayed. In the wild, making noise alerts predators to your location and intentions. The same rule applies to human interaction. When you are in a negotiation or a heated argument, the natural impulse is to over-explain. You want to justify your actions, defend your ego, or simply fill the awkward pauses. This behavior is a tactical error because every sentence you speak offers your opponent a new surface to attack. You are revealing your anxieties, your logic, and your emotional breaking point. By choosing silence, you invert this dynamic. You become a black box that cannot be read. The person across from you has no data to work with, so they are forced to project their own fears and assumptions onto you. They begin to bid against themselves or reveal secrets just to get a reaction. While they exhaust their energy trying to provoke you or guess your position, You remain safe behind a wall of quiet observation. You are not just being passive, you are actively gathering the intelligence needed to make a single, decisive move when the time is right. 2 is 1, 1 is none. The most dangerous thing you can do when you are hurting is to pretend that you aren't. In a culture that celebrates grinding and toughing it out, we are trained to view pain as a weakness to be ignored or a nuisance to be numbed with medication. In a survival scenario, however, pain is not an enemy. It is pure, unadulterated intelligence. Biologically, pain is a high-priority status report from your nervous system. It is the check engine light on your body's dashboard. When you feel a sharp twinge in your ankle or a burning sensation on your heel, your body is transmitting critical data telling you that a specific component is failing. If you ignore a hot spot on your foot while hiking because you want to be tough, that minor irritation turns into a blister. That blister pops, becomes an open wound, and eventually leads to a septic infection that prevents you from walking at all. You have turned a 10-second fix, stopping to smooth out your sock, into a life-threatening mobility kill. To survive, you must strip away the emotional reaction to suffering and view it coldly as information. When you feel discomfort, you do not suppress it. You stop immediately and ask what the signal is trying to tell you. Is your pack uneven? Is your hydration low? Is your shelter too drafty? This applies to the mind as well. Panic and loneliness are not just feelings. They are data points indicating that your current strategy is not working. By treating pain as an objective messenger rather than a personal failing, you catch small problems before they metastasize into disasters that no amount of toughness can fix. Mind is for having ideas, not storing them. The human brain is a brilliant factory for processing information, but a terrible warehouse for storing it. While we often pride ourselves on having a steel trap memory, trying to hold every task, appointment, and idea in your head is actually a recipe for cognitive failure. The problem lies in how your subconscious handles unfinished business. When you tell yourself you need to buy milk or email a client without writing it down, your brain tags that thought as an open loop. It views this unrecorded task as a potential threat to your survival, constantly spinning in the background to ensure you don't forget it. This creates a persistent, low-level anxiety that drains your mental energy and kills your focus. You aren't overwhelmed by the work itself, you are overwhelmed by the mental effort of tracking it. The solution is to treat your mind strictly as a processing unit, not a storage device. You must build a trusted external system, whether it is a pocket notebook or a digital app, that captures every single incoming commitment the moment it hits your radar. By writing a task down, you effectively sign a contract with your brain that says the information is safe. Your subconscious recognizes that the loop is closed and stops pinging you about it. This practice clears your psychic RAM. Suddenly, the mental bandwidth that was being wasted on remembering a grocery list is freed up for problem solving and creativity. You regain the ability to be fully present in the moment, reacting to the world with a clear head rather than a cluttered one. The micro-goal strategy. The most effective way to endure an insurmountable challenge is to absolutely refuse to look at the big picture. When faced with a massive undertaking, like hiking 50 miles out of a wilderness or rebuilding a shelter after a storm destroys it, the human brain naturally tries to process the entire scope of the problem at once. It calculates the days of walking, the lack of calories, and the freezing nights ahead. This massive data dump triggers psychological paralysis. You feel defeated before you even take the first step, because the end goal feels abstract and unachievable. The micro-goal strategy is the mental hack used by special forces and endurance athletes to bypass this overwhelm. You must artificially shrink your horizon. You stop thinking about the destination and focus entirely on the immediate task right in front of your face. If you are hiking, your only goal is to make it to that distinct pine tree 100 yards ahead. Forget the 50 miles, just get to the tree. When you reach it, you have achieved a concrete victory. Your brain registers this success and releases a small hit of chemical reward that lowers anxiety and boosts morale. Then, you pick the next landmark, perhaps a large rock, and walk there. You do not need the willpower to survive the whole week. You only need enough willpower to survive the next hour. By stringing these microscopic successes together, you build the unstoppable momentum needed to finish a marathon without ever actually thinking about the finish line. The OODA loop. The person who processes reality the fastest controls the outcome of any conflict. This is the core principle of the OODA loop, a cognitive formula developed by fighter pilots to ensure they shot first and survived. While it sounds technical, it is actually a description of how every human brain makes decisions. It stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. The process begins with observation. You gather raw data from your environment, a sudden movement, a change in tone, or a dip in the stock market. Next comes orientation, which is the most critical and often overlooked step. This is where your brain filters that raw data through your past experiences, your culture, and your training to understand what it actually means. You aren't just seeing a car, you are recognizing a threat. Once you are oriented, you decide on a course of action, and finally, you act. The loop part is the secret weapon. In a fight or a negotiation, you and your opponent are both cycling through these 4 steps simultaneously. The goal is not just to complete your loop, but to do it faster than they do. If you can act before they have finished observing, you change the situation. By the time they reach their decide phase, the reality they were looking at is gone. They become confused and paralyzed, forced to restart their loop from the beginning. You are effectively resetting their brain over and over again until they collapse. Radical acceptance. The most lethal mindset in a disaster is the stubborn belief that your situation is unfair. While hope is generally considered a virtue, in the immediate aftermath of a crisis, hope can actually be a form of dangerous denial that prevents you from taking action. This is the core of radical acceptance. It is the ruthless understanding that you cannot build a fire with the dry wood you wish you had. You can only build it with the wet branches lying at your feet. Most people waste the first critical hours of an emergency fighting reality. They stand in the rain, complaining that the forecast said it would be sunny. Or they stare at a flat tire, wishing they had checked the spare. This mental friction burns precious glucose and emotional energy. It creates a gap between where you are and where you think you should be. Radical acceptance closes this gap instantly. It is not about liking your situation or giving up. It is simply the act of looking at the wreckage, whether it is a car crash or a failed career, and saying, "This is happening." By acknowledging the brutal facts without judgment, you stop wasting energy on why and switch your brain entirely to how. You stop waiting for a rescue that might not come and start inventorying the tools you actually possess. You move from the victim of a tragedy to the architect of a solution. The moment you accept that you are cold, lost, or broke is the exact moment you begin to survive it. The stop rule. The single most powerful survival maneuver you can execute when disaster strikes is to simply sit down and do absolutely nothing. The moment you realize you are lost or in a crisis, your brain floods with adrenaline. This ancient fight or flight alarm system screams at you to take action, to run faster, and to fix the problem immediately. In a modern survival scenario, however, this instinct is a lethal trap. Blind movement only burns precious energy, increases your risk of falling, and drives you deeper into the wilderness, making it exponentially harder for rescuers to locate you. To override this impulse, you must apply the stop rule. It is a mental brake pedal designed to halt panic before it spirals out of control. The first step is to sit. This is purely physical. By forcing your body to become stationary, you interrupt the chemical feedback loop of anxiety. Once you are seated, you think. You fight back the urge to imagine the worst-case scenario and instead analyze the facts of how you got there. Next, you observe. You look at your surroundings not as a terrifying void, but as an inventory of resources. Finally, you plan. You build a deliberate step-by-step strategy based on reality rather than fear. This deliberate pause is usually the difference between a successful rescue and a tragedy. It transforms a panicked victim running aimlessly through the woods into a rational survivor waiting patiently to be found. Pain is data. The most dangerous thing you can do when you are hurting is to pretend that you aren't. In a culture that celebrates grinding and toughing it out, we are trained to view pain as a weakness to be ignored or a nuisance to be numbed with medication. In a survival scenario, however, pain is not an enemy. It is pure, unadulterated intelligence. Biologically, pain is a high-priority status report from your nervous system. It is the check engine light on your body's dashboard. When you feel a sharp twinge in your ankle or a burning sensation on your heel, your body is transmitting critical data telling you that a specific component is failing. If you ignore a hot spot on your foot while hiking because you want to be tough, that minor irritation turns into a blister. That blister pops, becomes an open wound, and eventually leads to a septic infection that prevents you from walking at all. You have turned a 10-second fix, stopping to smooth out your sock, into a life-threatening mobility kill. To survive, you must strip away the emotional reaction to suffering and view it coldly as information. When you feel discomfort, you do not suppress it. You stop immediately and ask what the signal is trying to tell you. Is your pack uneven? Is your hydration low? Is your shelter too drafty? This applies to the mind as well. Panic and loneliness are not just feelings. They are data points indicating that your current strategy is not working. By treating pain as an objective messenger rather than a personal failing, you catch small problems before they metastasize into disasters that no amount of toughness can fix. The spotlight illusion. Social anxiety is often just a glitch in your perception called the spotlight illusion. You walk into a crowded room or make a mistake in public, and your brain convinces you that a massive theatrical spotlight has just swung in your direction. You feel exposed, with judging eyes fixing on every flaw and movement. This happens because you are the center of your own universe. You see the world entirely through your own eyes, so it is natural to assume you are the protagonist in everyone else's reality too. But this is a mathematical impossibility. The truth is that human beings are aggressively self-obsessed. While you are worrying about the stain on your shirt, the person next to you is consuming all their mental energy worrying about the joke they told 5 minutes ago. They are not looking at you because they are too busy looking at themselves. In psychological studies, people consistently overestimate who notice them by a factor of 2 or 3. Understanding this is a tactical superpower. It means your awkward moments, your stumbles, and your bad inputs are functionally invisible. The audience you are so afraid of does not exist. Once you realize that nobody is watching, the paralyzing weight of judgment disappears. You become free to take risks, to speak up, and to act without the fear of a review that is never coming. You are hidden in plain sight by the sheer narcissism of the crowd. The favor paradox. If you want to turn a rival into an ally, the worst thing you can do is try to buy their affection with favors. The psychological shortcut to winning loyalty is actually the opposite. You have to ask them to do something for you. This counterintuitive strategy is known as the Ben Franklin effect. It is based on a wiring quirk in the human brain involving cognitive dissonance. We naturally assume that our actions follow our feelings, that we help people because we like them. But the brain also runs this logic in reverse. It looks at your actions to determine how you feel. If you perform a kindness for someone you dislike, your brain enters a state of conflict. It cannot reconcile the fact that you are helping someone you supposedly hate. To resolve this tension and restore internal consistency, the brain literally rewrites your opinion. It concludes that since you are doing a favor for this person, you must actually like them. You can weaponize this mechanic with subtle, low-cost requests. Do not ask for a massive sacrifice that triggers defensiveness. Ask for a small, easy favor, like borrowing a book or asking for a quick opinion on a project. By getting someone to invest even a tiny amount of effort in your success, you force their subconscious to justify that investment. They are no longer an observer. They are now a contributor to your life. The moment they hand you that book, they have unconsciously agreed that you are a person worth helping. You aren't tricking them into liking you. You are letting them convince themselves. The silence gap. The most powerful weapon in a high-stakes negotiation is not a shouting match, but a deliberately uncomfortable pause. In the world of intelligence gathering and business deals, this is known as the silence gap. Human beings are socially conditioned to hate a vacuum in conversation. We view silence as a sign of disapproval or a failure to communicate. When the rhythm of dialogue breaks, our internal anxiety spikes instantly. We feel a desperate primal urge to fill the void with noise. You can exploit this reflex to extract information that someone is trying to withhold. When you ask a tough question and receive a rehearsed or partial answer, you must resist the instinct to nod or respond. Instead, you do absolutely nothing. You maintain soft eye contact and keep your face neutral. You let the silence hang in the air like a physical weight. The other person's brain will interpret this lack of feedback as a rejection of their answer. The pressure becomes unbearable within seconds. To relieve the tension, they will inevitably start talking again. They will add details, they will justify themselves, and often, they will blurt out the unvarnished truth just to bridge the gap and restore social harmony. It requires immense self-control to keep your mouth shut when every instinct tells you to speak. But in a conflict, the person who breaks the silence first is usually the one who loses the leverage. You are trading your comfort for their secrets. Willpower rationing. The reason you cannot leave a toxic relationship is identical to the reason a gambler cannot walk away from a slot machine. It is not because you are loyal or hopeful. It is because your brain is being chemically held hostage by a mechanism called intermittent reinforcement. To understand this trap, you have to look at how we process rewards. If a vending machine takes your money and fails to give you a soda, you stop using it immediately. Predictable failure makes you quit. Conversely, if the machine gives you a soda every single time, you get bored and take it for granted. Predictable success kills passion. The addiction happens in the middle ground. The slot machine works just often enough to keep you guessing. It fails 5 times, but on the 6th pull, it gives you a win. This uncertainty triggers a massive spike of dopamine, far higher than if you had won every time. your brain stops looking for the reward itself and starts getting high on the anticipation of the reward. In your life, this manifests as the boss who is critical for months, but suddenly gives you distinct praise, or the partner who is distant for weeks and then offers a single night of intense affection. You suffer through the bad times, not because you enjoy them, but because you are biologically wired to chase that unpredictable moment of validation. The gambler's shackle keeps you pulling the lever, waiting for the payout that covers your losses. The only way to escape is to realize that the randomness is not a streak of bad luck or a sign of complexity. It is the cage itself. Once you see the pattern, you realize the machine is rigged, and the only winning move is to stop playing. The gambler's shackle. The reason you cannot leave a toxic relationship is identical to the reason a gambler cannot walk away from a slot machine. It is not because you are loyal or hopeful. It is because your brain is being chemically held hostage by a mechanism called intermittent reinforcement. To understand this trap, you have to look at how we process rewards. If a vending machine takes your money and fails to give you a soda, you stop using it immediately. Predictable failure makes you quit. Conversely, if the machine gives you a soda every single time, you get bored and take it for granted. Predictable success kills passion. The addiction happens in the middle ground. The slot machine works just often enough to keep you guessing. It fails 5 times, but on the 6th pull, it gives you a win. This uncertainty triggers a massive spike of dopamine, far higher than if you had won every time. Your brain stops looking for the reward itself and starts getting high on the anticipation of the reward. In your life, this manifests as the boss who is critical for months, but suddenly gives you distinct praise, or the partner who is distant for weeks and then offers a single night of intense affection. You suffer through the bad times, not because you enjoy them, but because you are biologically wired to chase that unpredictable moment of validation. The gambler's shackle keeps you pulling the lever, waiting for the payout that covers your losses. The only way to escape is to realize that the randomness is not a streak of bad luck or a sign of complexity. It is the cage itself. Once you see the pattern, you realize the machine is rigged, and the only winning move is to stop playing. Anxiety reframing. Your body cannot tell the difference between a panic attack and winning the lottery. Biologically, the terror of public speaking and the thrill of a roller coaster look exactly the same. This physiological loophole is the key to mastering high-pressure situations through a technique called anxiety reframing. When you feel anxious, whether before a big presentation or a difficult conversation, your sympathetic nervous system dumps a cocktail of adrenaline and cortisol into your bloodstream. Your heart races, your palms sweat, and your focus narrows. Most people interpret these signals as a warning that something is wrong. They try to calm down, but trying to force yourself from a state of high arousal, anxiety, to low arousal, calm, is like trying to slam a car into reverse while driving 80 miles an hour on the highway. It requires a massive amount of cognitive energy and usually fails. Your body is already revved up. It wants to go somewhere. The survival hack is to steer that energy rather than stop it. Instead of saying, "I am nervous," you say out loud, "I am excited." Because the physical symptoms are identical, your brain is surprisingly willing to accept this new label. You are acknowledging the energy, but changing its context from a threat to an opportunity. Studies show that people who reframe anxiety as excitement actually perform better than those who try to stay calm. They speak more confidently and think faster. You aren't suppressing the fear, You are hijacking the adrenaline it produces to power your performance. The anchor drop. You can win a negotiation before a single argument is made, simply by being the first person to say a number. This psychological maneuver is called the anchor drop, and it exploits a glitch in the human brain, where we rely far too heavily on the first piece of information we receive. When you walk into a room to buy a car or negotiate a salary, the value of the deal is an abstract cloud. It could be anything. The moment someone speaks a specific figure, that cloud collapses into a concrete baseline. That number is the anchor. From that second forward, every counter-offer and every adjustment is measured in relation to that initial number. If you are selling a used camera and you want $500, you should start the conversation at $800. Even if the buyer laughs and rejects it, their brain has now pegged the item's value in the 800 range. When you eventually concede and drop to 500, it feels like a massive bargain to them, even though it was your target all along. Many people wait for the other person to make the first offer because they want to be polite, or they fear aiming too high. This is a tactical error. By waiting, you allow them to set the anchor, forcing you to swim upstream against their psychological current. To survive a deal, you must have the courage to set the extreme boundary first, effectively warping the other person's perception of reality to fit your desired outcome. Learned helplessness. The most dangerous prison in the world has the door unlocked. This phenomenon is called learned helplessness, and it explains why a powerful adult elephant can be held in place by a tiny wooden stake. When that elephant was a baby, it was tied to a massive tree with a heavy chain. It pulled and fought for days, but the chain was too strong. Eventually, the animal's brain encoded a permanent rule: pulling is useless. Years later, the elephant is fully grown and strong enough to snap a tree in half. The trainer ties it to a flimsy stick with a light rope. The elephant does not move. It doesn't test the rope because its memory tells it that escape is impossible before it even tries. Humans fall into this exact same trap. If you stay in a toxic job or a bad relationship, where your efforts to change things are repeatedly punished or ignored, your brain eventually stops looking for the exit. You stop sending out resumes or setting boundaries because you have learned that you have no agency. The tragedy is that circumstances change. The economy shifts, the abuser loses power, or you gain new skills. The door that was locked 5 years ago is now standing wide open. To survive this mental paralysis, you must adopt a habit of constantly testing the walls. You have to assume your previous failures were specific to that time and place, not a permanent law of the universe. You must be willing to tug on the rope one more time, just to see if it breaks. The bystander antidote. The most dangerous prison in the world has the door unlocked. This phenomenon is called learned helplessness, and it explains why a powerful adult elephant can be held in place by a tiny wooden stake. When that elephant was a baby, it was tied to a massive tree with a heavy chain. It pulled and fought for days, but the chain was too strong. Eventually, the animal's brain encoded a permanent rule: pulling is useless. Years later, the elephant is fully grown and strong enough to snap a tree in half. The trainer ties it to a flimsy stick with a light rope. The elephant does not move. It doesn't test the rope because its memory tells it that escape is impossible before it even tries. Humans fall into this exact same trap. If you stay in a toxic job or a bad relationship where your efforts to change things are repeatedly punished or ignored, your brain eventually stops looking for the exit. You stop sending out resumes or setting boundaries because you have learned that you have no agency. The tragedy is that circumstances change. The economy shifts, the abuser loses power, or you gain new skills. The door that was locked 5 years ago is now standing wide open. To survive this mental paralysis, you must adopt a habit of constantly testing the walls. You have to assume your previous failures were specific to that time and place, not a permanent law of the universe. You must be willing to tug on the rope one more time just to see if it breaks. Emotional granularity. The most dangerous prison in the world has the door unlocked. This phenomenon is called learned helplessness, and it explains why a powerful adult elephant can be held in place by a tiny wooden stake. When that elephant was a baby, it was tied to a massive tree with a heavy chain. It pulled and fought for days, but the chain was too strong. Eventually, the animal's brain encoded a permanent rule: pulling is useless. Years later, the elephant is fully grown and strong enough to snap a tree in half. The trainer ties it to a flimsy stick with a light rope. The elephant does not move. It doesn't test the rope because its memory tells it that escape is impossible before it even tries. Humans fall into this exact same trap. If you stay in a toxic job or a bad relationship where your efforts to change things are repeatedly punished or ignored, your brain eventually stops looking for the exit. You stop sending out resumes or setting boundaries because you have learned that you have no agency. The tragedy is that circumstances change. The economy shifts, the abuser loses power, or you gain new skills. The door that was locked 5 years ago is now standing wide open. To survive this mental paralysis, you must adopt a habit of constantly testing the walls. You have to assume your previous failures were specific to that time and place, not a permanent law of the universe. You must be willing to tug on the rope one more time, just to see if it breaks. The urine myth. There is a dangerous lie perpetuated by movies and old military manuals that claims drinking your own urine can save you from dehydration. In a true survival scenario, this advice is not just wrong, it is a physiological suicide pact. To understand why, you have to look at the kidney as a filtration system. Its entire job is to scrub your blood of impurities, excess salts, and nitrogenous waste like urea. Urine is the concentrated sludge that your body has rejected because it is toxic. It is the waste product, not a resource. When you are stranded and running out of water, your body enters conservation mode. Your kidneys work overtime to recycle as much water as possible, meaning the urine you do produce becomes highly concentrated. It is a potent cocktail of sodium and toxins. If you drink this fluid, you are pouring those toxins right back into the system that just worked to remove them. This forces your kidneys to process the same waste twice. But here is the brutal math. To flush those concentrated salts out a second time, your body needs more fresh water than what was contained in the urine you drank. The net result is negative hydration. You are effectively drinking seawater. This triggers a rapid spiral into kidney failure and uremia. Your body temperature rises, you become nauseous, and you eventually vomit, losing the last critical reserves of moisture you had. While it is true that you can distill urine, boiling it and trapping the condensation, drinking it raw is a critical error. It strains your internal organs when they are already weak and accelerates the dying process. In the desert or on a raft, the rule is absolute: never drink waste. Rectal rehydration. If you are stranded and severely dehydrated to the point of vomiting, drinking water is actually a death sentence. Your body has entered a rejection cycle where your stomach convulses and expels fluid faster than it can absorb it. You lose more hydration than you take in, accelerating the timeline to organ failure. In this specific nightmare scenario, the only way to survive is to bypass the stomach entirely. The human body has a secondary intake valve that most people ignore. The large intestine is biologically designed to extract water from waste material. It acts like a sponge, pulling moisture into the bloodstream. This mechanism works in reverse. If you introduce water directly into the colon, the body absorbs it immediately, skipping the nausea trigger in the stomach. This technique is known medically as proctoclysis, or colloquially as the Murphy drip. In a survival situation, it requires a length of tubing, siphoned from a hydration pack or a medical kit, and a water container. You essentially create a gravity-fed enema. The water does not need to be sterile, though it should be as clean as possible. The colon is already full of bacteria and is far more resilient than the stomach. By allowing the water to drip slowly into the rectum, your body can absorb up to a litre of fluid per hour. It is an undignified, uncomfortable, and desperate measure. But when you are trapped on a life raft unable to keep fluids down, or suffering from dysentery in the desert, dignity is a luxury you cannot afford. This method rehydrates your vital organs, stabilizes your blood pressure, and buys you the time you need to be rescued. Rabbit starvation. If you are stranded and severely dehydrated to the point of vomiting, drinking water is actually a death sentence. Your body has entered a rejection cycle where your stomach convulses and expels fluid faster than it can absorb it. You lose more hydration than you take in, accelerating the timeline to organ failure. In this specific nightmare scenario, the only way to survive is to bypass the stomach entirely. The human body has a secondary intake valve that most people ignore. The large intestine is biologically designed to extract water from waste material. It acts like a sponge, pulling moisture into the bloodstream. This mechanism works in reverse. If you introduce water directly into the colon, the body absorbs it immediately, skipping the nausea trigger in the stomach. This technique is known medically as proctoclysis, or colloquially as the Murphy drip. In a survival situation, it requires a length of tubing, siphoned from a hydration pack or a medical kit, and a water container. You essentially create a gravity-fed enema. The water does not need to be sterile, though it should be as clean as possible. The colon is already full of bacteria and is far more resilient than the stomach. By allowing the water to drip slowly into the rectum, your body can absorb up to a litre of fluid per hour. It is an undignified, uncomfortable, and desperate measure. But when you are trapped on a life raft unable to keep fluids down, or suffering from dysentery in the desert, dignity is a luxury you cannot afford. This method rehydrates your vital organs, stabilizes your blood pressure, and buys you the time you need to be rescued. Maggot debridement therapy. In a scenario where gangrene threatens to take your limb, your best hope for survival might be allowing insects to eat your flesh. Deep wounds in the wilderness are ticking time bombs. Once infection sets in, the tissue dies and turns black. This necrotic flesh blocks blood flow and feeds bacteria that will eventually poison your blood. Modern doctors treat this by surgically cutting away the rot. In the wild, you do not have a sterile operating room, but nature provides a biological equivalent. Maggot debridement therapy uses the larvae of common blowflies to perform microsurgery. These creatures are specialized scavengers. When placed on a festering wound, they secrete digestive enzymes that liquefy the dead tissue so they can consume it. Crucially, specific species like the greenbottle fly ignore healthy tissue entirely. They eat the rot right up to the margin of the living skin and then stop. In the process, they also secrete natural substances that kill harmful bacteria and promote healing. However, this strategy requires dangerous precision. You must be able to identify the greenbottle fly, which typically has a metallic green sheen. You must strictly avoid the screw worm fly, which looks similar but has a dark blue body. Screw worms do not discriminate. They eat living muscle and will bore deep into healthy organs, effectively enlarging the wound. If you have identified the right species, the process involves allowing the flies to lay eggs on the wound, or collecting larvae and applying them directly. It is a repulsive, psychological nightmare to endure. You can feel the movement inside the injury, but after a few days, the black rot is gone, replaced by pink, oxygenated tissue. It converts a fatal, septic wound into something that can actually heal. Paradoxical undressing. Search and rescue teams frequently encounter a baffling scene. Victims of exposure found frozen to death, completely naked, with their clothes folded neatly nearby. This is not the result of foul play or madness, but a specific physiological failure known as paradoxical undressing. When the human body is exposed to extreme cold, its first defense is vasoconstriction. The brain commands the blood vessels in the arms and legs to clamp down tight. This sacrifices the extremities to keep the warm blood circulating around the vital organs in the core. It is why your fingers go numb first. This defense mechanism is effective, but it requires the muscles around your veins to stay contracted for hours. As hypothermia deepens and the body's energy reserves are depleted, the small muscles keeping those blood vessels clamped shut eventually fail. They become exhausted and relax. When this happens, the dam breaks. A sudden surge of warm blood from the core rushes back into the freezing extremities. To the victim, whose brain is already clouded by the cold, this sensation is not interpreted as relief, but as an intense, burning heat. They feel as if they are suddenly overheating. In a final act of confusion, they tear off their heavy jackets, pants and boots to cool down. This creates a fatal feedback loop. The warm blood that was keeping the heart and lungs alive is now exposed to the freezing air in the limbs, cooling rapidly. The body temperature plummets. Moments after undressing, the victim typically loses consciousness and dies. Understanding this phenomenon is crucial because if you see a hypothermic companion suddenly complain of being too hot, it is not a sign of recovery. It is a signal that their body's defenses have collapsed and they are minutes away from death. The polar bear liver trap. Successfully hunting an apex predator in the Arctic should be the ultimate survival victory, but eating the wrong part of the kill turns it into a suicide mission. The liver of a polar bear contains a concentration of vitamin A so high that it acts as a lethal poison to humans. Our bodies need vitamin A, but only in trace amounts. The polar bear, however, accumulates massive stores of it to process the fatty blubber of seals. A single ounce of this liver contains enough retinol to overwhelm your system completely. This condition is called hypervitaminosis A. The symptoms are horrific. It starts with drowsiness and irritability, followed by a splitting headache as the cerebrospinal fluid pressure inside your skull increases. The most distinct and gruesome symptom is the peeling. Your skin begins to slough off in large sheets, starting around the mouth and spreading to the rest of the body. In severe cases, liver damage, hemorrhage, and death follow within days. This biological trap isn't unique to bears. It applies to bearded seals, walruses, and even sled dogs. Arctic indigenous groups have known this for centuries, often burying the liver to prevent their own dogs from eating it. If you find yourself surviving in the frozen north, you must treat this specific organ as toxic waste. You can eat the meat, the fat, and the heart, but you must leave the liver in the snow. Drinking turtle blood. If you are adrift at sea, the water around you is a poison that will kill you if you drink it. As dehydration sets in, the urge to find any liquid becomes overpowering, leading many survivors to make a fatal mistake: drinking the blood of birds or fish they manage to catch. For most animals, and specifically for mammals, blood is a gastric irritant. It is high in iron and salts. When you drink it on an empty, dehydrated stomach, the human body rejects it violently. You will vomit immediately, losing precious fluids and accelerating your death. The sea turtle, however, is a biological exception to this rule. Survivors on life rafts have discovered through desperation that the blood of a sea turtle does not trigger this emetic response. Due to the unique way these reptiles filter salt from their systems, their blood creates a fluid that is hydrating rather than dehydrating. It lacks the specific toxic concentrations found in seabirds or sharks. Harvesting this resource is a grim task. Turtles are often curious and will approach rafts, allowing castaways to haul them aboard. Once caught, the animal must be turned on its back. The blood is collected immediately, as it coagulates into a jelly-like substance very quickly. It is not a pleasant drink. It tastes of raw iron and musk, but chemically, it provides water and electrolytes that your kidneys can actually process, while drinking the blood of a rat or a seagull will kill you faster. The sea turtle offers a legitimate lifeline, turning a predator into a mobile reservoir of fresh water in the middle of a salt ocean. When you are lost at sea, the ocean is a cruel paradox. You are surrounded by billions of gallons of water, yet not a single drop is safe to drink. The salt in seawater draws moisture out of your cells, shrinking them and shutting down your kidneys. But if you can catch a fish, you have a hidden source of fresh water staring right at you. Most people know you can eat raw fish for protein, but protein requires water to digest. If you eat the flesh without having fresh water to drink, you are actually dehydrating yourself further. The survival secret lies in the eyes. Fish eyes are different from the rest of the animal's body. They contain a pocket of vitreous humour, a clear, jelly-like fluid that is largely free of the salt content found in the fish's blood and flesh. It is essentially a small organic water balloon. To access it, you don't need tools. You simply remove the eye from the socket. It requires breaking through the tough outer membrane, usually by biting down or making a small incision. Once the seal is broken, you suck the fluid out. It is a small amount of liquid, perhaps only a sip per fish, but in a survival situation, survival is a game of ounces. This fluid is hypertonic, meaning your body can absorb it as hydration. It doesn't taste like the ocean. It is relatively bland. Survivors of shipwrecks have sustained themselves for weeks by harvesting this specific fluid. It is gruesome work that requires you to overcome your gag reflex. But when the sun is beating down and your canteen is dry, that small pocket of fluid is the difference between life and death. Vet clinics versus pharmacies. In a widespread collapse or riot scenario, the local pharmacy is the first place everyone runs to. Within hours, the shelves are stripped bare, and the building becomes a dangerous hotspot for violence. The smart survivalist ignores the drugstore completely and heads to the veterinary clinic. Most people don't realize that the biology of a dog or a cat is surprisingly similar to a human's when it comes to basic medication. A vet clinic is effectively a stocked hospital that nobody thinks to loot. The most valuable find here is antibiotics. Fishmox or Bird Biotic are brand names you might see. These are actually amoxicillin and ciprofloxacin, the exact same chemical compounds prescribed to humans for infections, just labelled for animals. In a world without doctors, an infected tooth or a deep cut can kill you just as easily as a bullet. These pills are lifesavers. Beyond pills, Vet clinics are gold mines for trauma gear. You will find high-grade suture kits, scalpels, and antiseptic washes designed for surgery. They also stock painkillers and sedatives like ketamine, which can be critical for setting broken bones or performing field procedures. The logic here is purely tactical. While the pharmacy is being fought over by a desperate mob, the vet clinic on the side street is usually locked and quiet. You aren't just scavenging for better supplies. You are scavenging in a place where you are far less likely to be shot while doing it. It's about securing the same life-saving chemistry without the human risk. Superglue sutures. A tube of superglue can replace a surgeon's needle in an emergency, but using it incorrectly can cost you a limb. While the label warns against skin contact, the chemical inside, cyanoacrylate, was widely used in the Vietnam War to seal combat wounds instantly. It is a powerful tool for survival, provided you understand the specific technique required to use it safely. The biggest mistake people make is pouring the glue directly inside the cut. This damages the raw tissue and stops the healing process. Instead, you need to treat the glue like a strip of tape that you paint on. First, the wound must be flushed out with water to remove debris. Once it is clean, you pinch the edges of the skin together until they touch. Then, you apply a thin layer of glue over the top of the seam, bridging the gap between the two sides of healthy skin. You hold it for 30 seconds until it hardens into a plastic shell. However, there is a brutal catch. If the wound is deep or dirty, you must not seal it completely. Closing a dirty wound traps bacteria inside a warm, moist environment, which guarantees a severe infection or abscess. In these cases, you must leave a small opening at one end of the cut. This acts as a drainage port, allowing pus and fluid to escape rather than building up pressure inside your body. It is a messy, imperfect solution, but it stops the bleeding and keeps the wound closed enough to get you home. The universal edibility test. If you are starving in the wilderness, the forest looks like an endless buffet, but in reality, it is a biological minefield where one wrong bite can stop your heart. To distinguish food from poison without a guide, you must follow a rigorous, agonizingly slow protocol known as the universal edibility test. This is not about taking a small bite and seeing what happens. It is a calculated, 24-hour experiment using your own body as the laboratory. The first rule is to separate the plant. You never test the whole thing at once. You test only the leaves or only the roots. Some plants have edible berries but poisonous stalks. Begin by rubbing the raw plant material on a sensitive patch of your skin, like the inside of your wrist or elbow. Then, you wait. You must wait 8 full hours without washing the area. If you see a rash or feel burning, throw the plant away. If your skin is clear, move to the mouth. Touch the plant to your lips for 3 minutes. If there is no burning or tingling, put it on your tongue. Hold it there for 15 minutes without chewing. If it tastes intensely bitter or soapy, spit it out. If the plant passes the taste test, chew a tiny amount and swallow it. Now comes the hardest part. You must wait another 8 hours. You cannot eat anything else during this time. You are monitoring for cramps, nausea, or dizziness. Only if you pass this final waiting period can you eat a small handful. It is a frustrating, hunger-inducing process. You are effectively starving yourself while staring at potential food. But this discipline is the only thing standing between a meal that saves your life and a meal that ends it. Toilet tank reserves. When the water grid fails in a city, panic usually sets in within 48 hours. People will loot grocery stores and fight over plastic bottles. completely unaware that they are likely sitting on a personal reservoir of clean, drinkable water in their own bathroom. I am not talking about the toilet bowl. Drinking from the bowl is a desperate act fraught with bacteria and disease. I am talking about the tank, the heavy rectangular box behind the seat, also known as the cistern. To understand why this works, you have to look at simple plumbing. The water sitting in that upper tank comes from the exact same supply line that feeds your kitchen faucet. It is municipal tap water that has been pumped in and is waiting to be used. Until you push the flush handle, that water is just sitting in a clean ceramic container, completely isolated from the waste below. In a typical home, this tank holds anywhere from 1.5 to 3 gallons of water. In an abandoned office building or hotel, you could have access to hundreds of gallons just by moving from room to room. Accessing it is simple. You lift the heavy porcelain lid and set it aside. Before you drink, you need to check one thing: the color. If the water is blue or green, it contains chemical cleaning agents or drop-in tablets. This water is toxic and cannot be consumed. However, if the water is clear, it is generally safe to use immediately. You can dip a cup in or siphon it out. It is a psychological hurdle for many people to drink from a toilet fixture. But in a survival situation, your ability to separate the design of the object from the utility of the resource is what keeps you alive. Brain tanning. There is a strange and slightly gruesome rule in nature that sounds like a myth but is biologically accurate. Every animal has a brain exactly large enough to tan its own hide. If you kill a deer or a rabbit for food in a survival situation, the skin is a valuable resource for warmth. However, you cannot just wear a raw skin. As it dries, raw skin turns into rawhide, a material as hard and stiff as a board. If it gets wet again, it rots. To turn that stiff board into soft, durable leather, you have to tan it. Modern factories use harsh chemicals like chromium for this process, but in the wild, the animal carries the necessary chemical kit inside its own skull. Brain tissue is incredibly high in emulsified fats and oils. When mashed up and mixed with a little warm water, it creates a greasy, grey slurry. This mixture acts as a natural dressing. The process involves scraping the skin clean of all meat and hair, then rubbing this brain slurry vigorously into the hide. The oils penetrate the fibres of the skin, replacing the water and preventing the collagen from gluing itself together as it dries. Once the solution is soaked in, you have to stretch and work the skin constantly until it is completely dry. This physical effort breaks the fibres, keeping the leather soft and pliable. It is a messy, bloody, and exhausting job. It requires you to handle organs that most people would throw away. But the result is buckskin, a soft, breathable, and waterproof material that can be made into boots, jackets, or blankets. It is the ultimate example of using every part of the animal to ensure your own survival. Autophagy. Your body is a machine designed to eat itself to stay alive, and understanding this biological switch is the key to managing hunger panic. When you stop eating, your immediate reaction is usually fear. You feel the pangs in your stomach and assume you are getting weaker by the minute. But for the first few days of a survival scenario, your body is actually entering a highly efficient state of self-cleaning called autophagy. The word literally translates to self-eating. Under normal conditions, your cells are busy digesting the constant stream of food you put into your mouth. When that supply line is cut, your cells do not simply shut down. Instead, they switch modes. They begin to scavenge the bloodstream and tissues for damaged components, old proteins, and cellular waste. Think of it like heating a house. When the firewood runs out, you don't immediately freeze. You start burning the trash lying around the room. Autophagy is your body burning its internal trash for fuel. This process offers a surprising survival advantage. Because your body is recycling waste rather than digesting heavy meals, many survivors report a period of intense mental clarity and alertness after the first 24 hours of fasting. You are running on a cleaner, more direct fuel source. However, this is a temporary life raft. Once the body has consumed its waste products and excess fat reserves, it will eventually turn on your muscles and organs. That is the point where fasting turns into starvation. But knowing that your body has this built-in backup generator allows you to stay calm during those first terrifying days without food. You are not dying yet. You are simply running on your reserves. Sugar for wounds. The same white granulated sugar you put in your coffee can be a more effective antibiotic than modern medicine when you are far from a hospital. It sounds like an old wives' tale, but packing a deep, open wound with sugar or honey is a battlefield medical technique that dates back to ancient Egypt and is still used by vets today. The science behind it relies on a simple principle. Bacteria need water to survive. They thrive in the moist, warm environment of an open cut. When you pack a wound completely with sugar, you create a chemical environment that is hostile to life. Sugar is hygroscopic, meaning it draws water to itself. When it dissolves into the wound's fluids, it creates a paste with incredibly high osmotic pressure. It acts like a molecular vacuum cleaner. It sucks the water right out of the bacterial cells themselves. Without water, the bacteria cannot reproduce or function, and they die. The sugar essentially dehydrates the infection to death while leaving your own tissue unharmed. To do this correctly, you must be generous. You cannot just sprinkle a little on top. You have to clean the wound first, stop the bleeding, and then fill the entire cavity with sugar until it is level with the skin. You then bandage it tightly to keep the sugar in place. There is a catch, however. As the wound weeps fluid, the sugar will eventually dilute and turn into a sugary syrup. Once it becomes diluted, it loses its bacteria-killing power and can actually start feeding the bacteria instead. Therefore, you must wash out the wound and repack it with fresh sugar every few hours to maintain that deadly, dry environment. It is a sticky, messy process, but it can stop gangrene in its tracks. Drilling gas tanks versus siphoning. If you're relying on the Hollywood trick of shoving a garden hose down a car's fuel pipe to get gas, you are going to end up stranded and empty-handed. Since the early 2000s, almost every vehicle manufacturer has installed anti-siphon screens and rollover valves in the filler neck. These are designed to stop fuel from leaking out in a crash, but they also stop you from getting a hose in. In a survival situation, when you need fuel for a generator or your own escape vehicle, you cannot play nice. You have to go underneath. The modern method requires a cordless drill or a sharp, heavy awl. You need to slide under the abandoned vehicle and locate the fuel tank, which is usually a large black protrusion under the rear seats. Here is the critical safety check. Tap it. Most modern fuel tanks are made of high-density plastic. If it sounds like plastic, you are safe to proceed. If it rings like metal, you must be extremely careful. Drilling into a metal tank creates heat and sparks, which can ignite the vapor and kill you instantly. If the tank is metal, use a non-sparking punch to puncture it instead. Once you have identified a safe spot, ideally the lowest point of the tank, you drill a hole. Gravity takes over immediately. A steady stream of gasoline will pour out, so you must have your jerry cans or buckets positioned beforehand. You can collect 10 to 15 gallons in a matter of minutes. This is a destructive, one-time method. You are permanently ruining that vehicle's ability to hold fuel. But in a collapse, That car is just a motionless steel container, and the fuel inside is liquid gold that is doing nobody any good sitting there. The three-person huddle. The Hollywood image of two survivors huddled together for warmth is romantic, but biologically inefficient. When two people cuddle, they effectively form a sandwich. While their chests are warm, their entire backs, roughly 50% of their surface area, remain exposed to the biting wind and cold. They are losing heat almost as fast as they are sharing it. The dynamic changes instantly when you add a third person. With three people, you can form a tight, interlocking triangle or a human sandwich. This geometry drastically reduces the amount of surface area exposed to the elements. By pressing your torsos together, you create a shared core in the center where heat is trapped and amplified. The person in the middle is insulated on both sides, absorbing radiant heat from two sources simultaneously. This allows for a critical survival tactic called cycling. The person who is coldest or most hypothermic is placed in the middle. They act as the heat sink, rapidly warming up their core temperature. Once they are stabilized, they rotate to the outside, and the next person takes the center spot. It requires no equipment, just body mass. You interlock legs and arms to close any air gaps where wind could intrude. By constantly rotating the middle position, a group of three can maintain a collective body temperature far higher than any individual or pair could achieve alone. In the freezing cold, three is not a crowd, it is a furnace. Condom canteens. The most valuable survival tool in your wallet might be a condom, provided you stop thinking of it as a contraceptive and start seeing it as a collapsible, sterile water bladder. Finding water is only half the battle. Carrying it is the other. If you find a spring 2 miles from your camp, you cannot transport that water in your cupped hands. You need a container. A non-lubricated latex condom is capable of stretching to unbelievable sizes, easily holding 1 to 2 liters of fluid without bursting. That is the equivalent of a large Nalgene bottle, yet it folds down flat enough to fit in a coin pocket. However, there is a critical technique to using one without disaster. While latex is strong, it is vulnerable to sharp twigs and thorns. A full condom is also slippery and difficult to hold, essentially a heavy, wobbling water balloon. To solve this, you need a shell. Take a sock, a beanie, or even a sleeve tied off at one end. Place the empty condom inside the sock first. Then, fill the condom with water while it is supported by the fabric. The sock does 2 things. First, it protects the thin latex from getting punctured by the environment. Second, it limits the expansion of the rubber so it doesn't stretch to its breaking point, while giving you a firm handle to carry it by. If you only have lubricated condoms, you can still use them, though the water will taste foul. You can try to wash the powder or oil off first, but in an emergency, bad-tasting water is better than no water. It looks ridiculous, but this simple piece of latex allows you to transport a day's worth of hydration back to your shelter. Eating leather. The old cartoon gag of a starving man boiling his boot for dinner is based on historical fact, but trying it with a modern shoe will likely poison you. The difference between a meal and a toxic chemical cocktail comes down to how that leather was made. At its core, leather is just animal skin, pure collagen and protein. In a famine, it is a legitimate source of calories that has kept people alive from the Donner Party to the Jamestown settlers. But those survivors had an advantage you likely don't. They wore vegetable-tanned leather. For thousands of years, leather was cured using tannins from tree bark and leaves. If you have a belt, holster, or sheath made this way, usually identifiable by its stiff, thick feel and earthy smell, it is edible. You have to cut it into strips and boil it for hours. The water will turn dark as the tannins leach out, and you must change the water repeatedly. Eventually, the leather softens into a gummy, flavorless paste of protein that you can chew and swallow. However, 80% of modern leather, including almost all fashion jackets, cheap belts, and sneaker uppers, is chrome tanned. This process uses chromium salts and heavy metals to make the leather soft and pliable. If you boil chrome tanned leather, you are brewing a soup of heavy metals. Eating it will cause severe gastric distress, vomiting, and internal toxicity, the exact opposite of survival. So, before you throw your belt in the pot, look at it. If it's a cheap, soft, mass-produced strip from a department store, keep it on your pants. But if it's an old, stiff piece of saddle leather or a handmade bushcraft sheath, it might just be the protein bar that gets you through the night. Bone marrow extraction. Most people eating a chicken wing clean the meat off and throw the bone away, but in a survival situation, that discarded bone is actually the most valuable caloric item on the plate. When you are starving, your body doesn't just need protein, it is screaming for fat. As we learned with rabbit starvation, lean meat alone cannot sustain you. You need high-density fuel to keep your body temperature up and your brain functioning. Nature hides this fuel inside the skeleton. Bone marrow is essentially pure fat. It is a creamy, nutrient-dense tissue that generates blood cells, and chemically, it is a survival superfood. A few ounces of marrow contain as many calories as pounds of lean muscle meat. It is the butter of the wilderness. To get to it, you have to stop treating the animal like a grocery store purchase and start acting like a scavenger. Gnawing on the ends of a bone isn't enough. You need to access the center cavity of the long bones, the legs and thighs. The technique is brutal but effective. You place the bone on a large, flat anvil rock. Then, take a second hand-sized rock and smash the center of the bone until it splinters open. Inside, you will find a pinkish white or yellow substance. You can eat it raw if you are desperate, but the best method is to toss the shattered bone fragments into a pot of water and boil them. The fat will render out, float to the top, and create a rich, greasy broth. This broth is instant energy. In a world where calories are currency, smashing bones is how you cash in the biggest check. Being, not just an obstacle or a bargaining chip. Psychologists and negotiators call this humanization. Most criminals, even violent ones, have to mentally dehumanize their victims to justify hurting them. They build a wall in their minds where you are just an object. Your goal is to dismantle that wall, brick by brick. The most effective weapon you have is your personal narrative. If you are allowed to speak, do not beg for your life, as this reinforces your status as a victim. Instead, talk about your responsibilities. Mention your children by name. Talk about your sick mother you care for. Say things like, "My daughter Sarah is waiting for me to pick her up." If they are going through your wallet, pray they find photos of your family. That split second where they see you hugging a child or smiling at a wedding forces a cognitive dissonance in their brain. It reminds them that you have a life outside of this room, just like they do. Physical cues matter too. Try to make eye contact, but keep it brief and submissive. Do not stare them down, which is a challenge, but do not look at the floor constantly either. You want them to see your eyes. It is a subtle, high-stakes psychological game. You are not trying to be their friend. You are simply trying to make yourself real. It is much harder to kill David, the father who coaches baseball, than it is to kill hostage number 1. The mammalian diving reflex. You possess a dormant superpower hidden in your genetic code that can instantly slow your heart and keep you alive underwater, but you have to trigger it manually. This biological switch is called the mammalian diving reflex. It is a leftover trait from our evolutionary ancestors that we share with whales, seals, and dolphins. Under normal stress, your heart races, burning through your oxygen reserves rapidly. This is exactly what you don't want when you are trapped in a sinking car or navigating a flooded cave. You need to conserve air, not burn it. To activate this reflex, you don't need training. You just need cold water. The trigger is located specifically in the nerves of your face, around your nose and eyes. When these nerves sense the shock of cold water, they send an immediate signal to your brainstem that says, "We are submerged." Your body responds instantly. It slams the brakes on your heart rate, dropping it by 10 to 25% within seconds. At the same time, it constricts the blood vessels in your arms and legs, shunting blood away from the extremities and concentrating it in the vital loop between your heart and brain. This physiological shift turns you into an oxygen-conserving machine. You can hold your breath significantly longer than you could on dry land. In a panic scenario, you can hack this system. If you are hyperventilating and need to calm down to make a dangerous swim, submerge your face in cold water before you go. If you are trapped, let the water hit your face rather than fighting to keep your head dry until the last second. By embracing the cold, you trick your body into slowing down, buying yourself the extra seconds of consciousness you need to escape. One of the most revolting yet efficient ways to preserve protein without refrigeration involves letting flies lay eggs in your food on purpose. While the rest of the world sees rotting cheese as trash, the shepherds of Sardinia see it as a survival delicacy called casu marzu. The concept breaks every rule of modern food safety. You take a wheel of pecorino cheese and intentionally cut a hole in the rind. You leave it outside, inviting the cheese fly to land and deposit its eggs inside. As the maggots hatch, they begin to eat the cheese. This is where the magic happens. The acid from the maggots' digestive systems breaks down the hard fats of the cheese, transforming it into a soft, creamy liquid. But you don't just eat the cheese, you eat the maggots too. In a starvation scenario, this is a nutritional jackpot. The cheese provides fat and calcium, while the thousands of live larvae provide a massive boost of pure protein. It turns a static piece of dairy into a living, high-energy superfood. There is a catch, of course. The maggots are alive. When disturbed, they can launch themselves up to 6 inches into the air. This requires you to cup your hand over the food as you eat it to prevent the larvae from jumping into your eyes. Furthermore, you must chew thoroughly. If you swallow the maggots whole, they can survive your stomach acid and attempt to bore through your intestinal walls, causing severe pain. It is a meal that fights back. But in a world where protein is scarce, the ability to turn a spoiling block of dairy into a calorie-dense feast is a skill that separates the hungry from the survivors. Red, orange, and yellow insects. Nature has a universal traffic light system for food, and if you ignore the red light, you will pay for it with your life. When you are scavenging for insects to eat, color is the single most important indicator of safety. In the insect world, survival strategies fall into 2 categories: hiding or advertising. Insects that are brown, black, or green are trying to disappear. They rely on camouflage because they are made of tasty, non-toxic protein. They know they are prey, so they blend into the leaves and dirt to avoid being eaten. These are the bugs you want to hunt: crickets, grasshoppers, and earthworms. In contrast, insects that are bright red, neon orange, or striking yellow are doing the exact opposite. They are bold. They sit out in the open on leaves and move slowly. They are not hiding because they don't have to. These colours are a biological warning sign that says, "I am dangerous." This phenomenon is nature's way of advertising toxicity. Many of these colourful insects absorb poisons from the plants they eat, like milkweed or nightshade, and concentrate those toxins in their bodies. If you eat a bright red blister beetle or a monarch butterfly larva, you aren't just eating a bug. You are ingesting a concentrated dose of chemical weaponry. The consequences range from severe blistering in your mouth and throat to cardiac arrest. The rule is simple and absolute. If a bug looks like a piece of candy, do not touch it. If it looks like a piece of dirt or a leaf, it is likely safe to cook and eat. In the desperate search for calories, you must let your eyes filter your menu before your stomach does. Birch bark spaghetti. Most people look at a forest and see firewood or shelter. But if you know where to slice, a birch tree is actually a vertical silo of calories. The white papery bark on the outside is famous for starting fires, but it is inedible. The survival food lies just beneath it. Trees have a vascular system, just like humans, and the layer responsible for transporting nutrients and sugars up and down the trunk is called the inner bark, or cambium. To access it, you need a knife. You make a vertical incision through the hard outer bark, being careful not to cut too deep into the wood itself. You peel back the outer layer to reveal a soft, moist, sponge-like sheet clinging to the hard wood. This is the inner bark. In the spring, this layer is sweet and full of sap. In the winter, it is tougher, but still packed with starch. You scrape or peel this layer off in long, ribbon-like strips. You cannot eat it raw. It is too fibrous and will cause severe indigestion. You have to treat it like pasta. You throw the strips into a pot of boiling water. As they cook, the fibres break down and the strips turn into a gelatinous noodle. The taste is mild and slightly woody, but nutritionally, it is a legitimate fuel source. Indigenous people and early settlers didn't just use this as emergency food. They dried it and ground it into flour to thicken soups or bake bread. When the game animals are hiding and your snares are empty, a single birch tree can provide enough spaghetti to keep your energy levels up for days. But about deciding if keeping it will kill the rest of you. It is the most extreme measure in survival medicine, reserved for moments when a specific part of your body has become a toxic factory, threatening to shut down your heart and kidneys. There are two primary scenarios that force this nightmare choice. The first is a crush injury. If a massive boulder pins a survivor's leg for several hours, the muscle tissue beneath the weight dies. As it dies, it releases a flood of potassium and toxic proteins. The moment you lift that rock and restore blood flow, those toxins rush into the bloodstream and hit the kidneys like a chemical bomb, causing cardiac arrest almost instantly. In this case, the amputation must happen before the weight is lifted to prevent that fatal release. The second scenario is rapidly spreading gangrene. If a wound turns black, smells like rotting meat, and the blackness is visibly creeping up the limb hour by hour, the tissue is dead. The criteria for amputation here is a race against the infection reaching the torso. The procedure itself is gruesome and requires absolute commitment. You cannot hesitate halfway through. You must apply a tourniquet high and tight to stop all blood flow. You cut through the skin and muscle first, allowing them to retract before sawing through the bone. This ensures that later, the skin can be pulled over the bone end to close the wound. It is not a surgery for pain relief. It causes agonizing shock. But when the choice is between living with one less limb or dying with all of them, the blade becomes your only option for survival. When the city water shuts off, Most homeowners panic and rush to the store for bottled water, unaware that they are already standing on top of a massive emergency reservoir. Hidden in the basement or utility closet of almost every modern home is a standard water heater, which acts as a sealed sanitary steel drum containing 40 to 50 gallons of clean drinking water. This water is not waste. It is the same tap water you drink every day, kept under pressure and ready for a shower that will never happen. In a survival situation, this tank becomes your primary life support system. Accessing it requires a specific sequence of steps to rely on gravity rather than pressure. First, you must kill the energy source. If it is electric, flip the breaker. If it is gas, turn the dial to off. This prevents the heating elements from burning out or the tank from exploding once it is empty. Next, locate the water intake valve at the top of the tank and twist it shut. This isolates your clean water from any potential contamination backing up from the city lines. Now comes the physics trick. If you open the drain valve at the bottom, nothing will come out because of the vacuum inside. You must go upstairs and turn on a hot water faucet. This breaks the vacuum, allowing air to enter the system and pushing the water down. Finally, attach a garden hose to the spigot at the base of the heater or place a bucket underneath it. Open the valve and fresh water will flow. It might be hot and there might be some sediment at the very bottom, but it is safe, potable, and plentiful enough to keep a family alive for weeks while the neighbours are fighting over empty shelves. Cauterization myths. Movies have taught us that if you get shot or stabbed, the tough thing to do is heat up a knife or pour gunpowder on the wound and light it. In the real world, cauterization is usually just a painful way to complicate your injury and accelerate infection. The theory sounds logical. Fire burns the blood vessels shut, stopping the bleeding. While this is technically true, the collateral damage is catastrophic. When you apply a red-hot blade to your flesh, you aren't just sealing the artery. You are destroying a massive amount of healthy tissue surrounding the wound. You are effectively giving yourself a third-degree burn on top of a puncture wound. This creates a layer of dead, charred flesh known as eschar. Dead tissue has no immune defense. It cannot fight off germs. Instead, it becomes a breeding ground for bacteria. By cauterizing a wound in a dirty environment, you are often sealing bacteria inside the injury behind a wall of dead meat. This almost guarantees a severe infection or gangrene later on. Furthermore, the pain of burning raw nerves is often enough to send a victim into shock, dropping their blood pressure and causing them to pass out. The only time cauterization is a valid medical choice is when the patient is bleeding to death from a major artery and no tourniquet is available. It is a life-over-limb decision where you accept that you are ruining the tissue to stop the heart from pumping out all its blood. For 99% of survival wounds, the boring answer is the right one: direct pressure. Pack the wound with cloth and press down hard. It takes longer and it doesn't look cool, but it keeps the tissue alive so it can actually heal. Shoulder self-reduction. If you dislocate your shoulder in the wild, the clock starts ticking immediately. You have a golden window of roughly 20 minutes before the massive muscles in your chest and back begin to spasm. Once those muscles seize up, they act like a steel trap, locking the bone out of its socket and making it physically impossible to reset without heavy sedation. You must act while the injury is fresh and the adrenaline is still masking the pain. The mechanics of the injury are simple. The ball of your arm bone has jumped the rim of the shoulder socket. To fix it, you cannot simply push it back in. You have to pull it out to clear the lip of the socket and then guide it back home. The most effective method to perform on yourself is called the Bossholtz technique. You sit on the ground with your knees bent up towards your chest. You reach forward and clasp your hands tightly together around your knees. If you are afraid your grip will fail from pain, tie your wrists together with a cloth. Relax your shoulder muscles as much as possible, then slowly lean your upper body backward. Do not jerk or yank. Simply let the weight of your torso act as a counterweight. This creates steady, powerful traction on the arm. As you lean back, the tension stretches the muscles and pulls the bone away from the scapula. Eventually, the ball will clear the rim and, often with a loud, sickening pop, snap back into the socket. The relief is instant. The blinding pain vanishes almost immediately. However, the ligaments are now stretched and loose. You must immediately bind the arm to your chest with a sling. If you reach for something, it will pop out again. You have fixed the bone, but the machinery holding it together is temporarily broken. Tampon fire starters. There is a common misconception in the tactical community that tampons are the ultimate fix for bullet holes. In reality, they are terrible at stopping arterial bleeding, but they are absolutely world-class at starting fires. If you have one in your survival kit, stop thinking of it as a bandage and start viewing it as the most reliable tinder on the planet. Fire requires 3 things: heat, oxygen, and fuel. In a damp forest, finding dry fuel is the hardest part. This is where the tampon shines. It is essentially a densely packed cylinder of premium, sterile cotton, hermetically sealed in a waterproof wrapper. You can drop it in a river, fish it out, and the cotton inside will still be bone dry. However, you cannot just hold a match to the cylinder. It is too dense. You have to process it first. Tear open the wrapper and pull the cotton plug apart. You need to tease the fibers until you have created a large, fluffy cloud about the size of a grapefruit. This maximizes the surface area, allowing oxygen to mix with the fibers. Once fluffed, this cotton is incredibly sensitive. It will catch the tiniest spark from a ferro rod or a dying lighter instantly. It flashes into a flame hot enough to dry out damp twigs and get your kindling going. To turn this flash fire into a sustained burn, add a lubricant. If you carry chapstick or petroleum jelly, smear it into the cotton ball before lighting it. The cotton acts as a wick while the jelly acts as fuel, creating a candle that will burn steadily for 5 to 10 minutes. While untrained survivors see a hygiene product, the expert sees a waterproof firebomb that fits in a pocket. Office vending machine scavenging. When a city descends into chaos, the local supermarket becomes a death trap. Within hours of a disaster, ground-level retail stores are stripped bare by panic-stricken mobs, and the aisles become the most dangerous places in the urban environment. The smart scavenger avoids these hotspots entirely and looks up. The most overlooked food reserves in a modern city are hidden inside the corporate office buildings that tower over the streets. These glass fortresses are generally ignored by looters who are focused on high-value items or bulk groceries. But if you can gain access to a corporate lobby and climb past the second floor, you enter a resource-rich ghost town. The target is the employee break room, specifically the vending machines. These are essentially glass-fronted safes filled with survival rations. While nutritionists demonize processed snacks, in a survival situation, they are perfect. A vending machine is stocked with food that is high in calories, packed with preservatives, and sealed in airtight packaging. A single bag of chips or a candy bar provides the quick energy burst needed to keep moving, and they remain edible for months or even years. Furthermore, office buildings offer safety through vertical distance. The chaos of a riot usually stays on the street level. By moving to the 10th or 20th floor, you isolate yourself from the violence below. You can scavenge dozens of floors, cracking open machines in break rooms, gathering litres of bottled water from conference rooms, and finding first aid kits at reception desks, all without fighting a single person. While the rest of the city battles over scraps on the sidewalk, the vertical scavenger finds solitude and sustenance in the cubicle farms above. It is a strategy of elevation, trading the quantity of a warehouse for the safety of the sky. Door hinge weapons. If you are trapped in a room and seemingly unarmed, you are likely staring right at a piece of heavy steel that can save your life. You just need to know how to dismantle the architecture around you. Most standard residential and commercial doors are hung on 3 hinges. While the door itself is wood or hollow composite, the hinges are solid metal. Specifically, the cylinder that allows the door to swing is held together by a central steel pin. This pin is not permanently fixed. It is designed to be removed, and once it is in your hand, it becomes a formidable close-quarters weapon. To extract it, you do not need tools. You just need leverage and impact. Locate the bottom of the hinge where the pin is exposed. You need a makeshift punch, a nail, a sturdy ballpoint pen, or a stiff twig, and a hammer, which can be the heel of your shoe, a rock, or a hardcover book. Place the punch against the bottom of the pin and strike it upward firmly. The paint seal will crack, and the head of the pin will pop up at the top. Once the head is exposed, you can wedge a flat object under it, or simply pull it out with your fingers. What you are left with is a 3 to 4 inch rod of hardened steel. It is heavy, dense, and unbreakable. Held in a clenched fist, it protrudes from the bottom of your hand, acting as an improvised kubotan. It concentrates the entire force of a punch into a surface area the size of a dime. A single strike with this pin can shatter a car window for escape or inflict incapacitating damage on an attacker. It turns the very door meant to trap you into the tool you need to fight your way out. The grey man theory. If you walk out of your house during a crisis wearing camouflage and carrying a massive tactical backpack, you are not a survivor, you are a target. In the survival community, looking prepared is the fastest way to get yourself killed. The most effective urban camouflage has nothing to do with blending into foliage and everything to do with blending into the crowd. This concept is called being a grey man. The human brain acts as a filter. In a chaotic environment like a riot or an evacuation, it scans for outliers, things that look dangerous or valuable. A person in military gear signals threat. A person with a bulging brand new hiking pack signals supplies. Both of these signals attract attention you cannot afford. The goal of the grey man is to be aggressively forgettable. You want to slide off the observer's eye. You are aiming for the visual baseline of the environment. If the crowd is wearing jeans and hoodies, you wear jeans and a hoodie. If everyone looks tired and dirty, you should rub dirt on your face and stoop your shoulders. This applies to your gear as well. Your supplies should be hidden inside a beat-up book bag or a dirty diaper bag, items that subconsciously register as trash or burden to an aggressor, not treasure. It is a psychological act as much as a physical one. You must avoid eye contact, but not so much that you look suspicious. You must move with purpose, but not fast enough to draw the eye. You are trying to inhabit the space between a victim and a threat. You want to look like part of the background scenery, a piece of urban furniture that offers nothing of value and poses no danger. In a world where standing out gets you shot, the ultimate survival skill is the ability to disappear in plain sight. Animal fat candles. When the batteries in your flashlight finally corrode and die, the sun goes down and leaves you in a pitch-black world that is both terrifying and dangerous. But if you have been successful in hunting or scavenging, the animal you are eating can provide you with hours of artificial light. Before the invention of electricity or paraffin wax, our ancestors conquered the dark using tallow, rendered animal fat. Almost every mammal has deposits of hard white fat, particularly around the kidneys and loins. This fat, known as sweat, is fuel. In its raw form, it will just melt and sizzle, so you have to process it. This is called rendering. You chop the fat into small chunks and heat it slowly in a pot or on a flat rock next to the fire. As it heats, the pure oil separates from the connective tissue. You pour this golden liquid into a container, a seashell, a hollowed-out stone, or an empty soda can cut in half. While the fat is still liquid, you add a wick. This doesn't need to be store-bought string, a strip of cotton from an old t-shirt, a piece of twisted cedar bark, or even a dried mullein stalk works perfectly. You place the wick in the center and let the fat cool. As it solidifies, it turns white and hard, trapping the wick in place. When you light it, the flame melts the fat near the wick, drawing it up just like a modern candle. It burns with a smoky yellow light and smells like cooking meat, which can be pleasant or nauseating, depending on your hunger level. But practically, it changes everything. It allows you to repair gear, check wounds, or simply see the face of the person sitting next to you, pushing back the crushing psychological weight of the darkness. The hunter's response. Your hands are your primary survival tools, but in freezing temperatures, your body is biologically programmed to shut them down to save your heart. This defense mechanism is called vasoconstriction. When the temperature drops, the brain clamps the blood vessels in your fingers shut to keep warm blood in your core. The result is the claw hand, numb, stiff fingers that cannot strike a lighter, zip a jacket, or tie a knot. However, Arctic fishermen and indigenous hunters possess a physiological adaptation that you can actually train yourself to develop. It is called the hunter's response. For a normal person, the blood vessels clamp shut and stay shut until the hands are warmed externally. But for someone with the hunter's response, the body learns to cycle the blood flow. The vessels constrict to save heat, but then, every few minutes, they suddenly dilate, sending a surge of hot blood rushing into the fingertips before clamping down again. This cycle keeps the hands nimble without chilling the core too much. You do not need to be born with this. You can condition your body to do it. The training is brutal but simple. You must expose your hands to ice-cold water on a regular basis. Fill a bucket with ice water and submerge your hands. It will be painful. Your body will panic and try to pull the blood away. Keep them in for a few minutes, then take them out and let them warm up naturally. By repeating this shock therapy over weeks, you are essentially rewriting your autonomic nervous system. You are teaching your brain that your hands are vital tools that must remain functional. With enough conditioning, your body stops viewing the cold as a reason to retreat and starts fighting to keep your dexterity alive. In a blizzard, having warm hands while everyone else is fumbling with frozen fingers is a superpower that lets you build the fire that saves the group. Fecal transplants, the most repulsive medical procedure in history, is also the only field expedient cure for the dysentery that has killed more soldiers than bullets. When you are dying of severe diarrhea and there are no antibiotics left, the answer to your survival lies inside the gut of a healthy companion. Dysentery is not just an upset stomach, it is a total collapse of your internal ecosystem. The bacteria that help you digest food and absorb water are wiped out, replaced by hostile invaders that turn your digestive tract into a smooth, slippery chute. You can drink gallons of water, but without that good bacteria, your body cannot absorb it. You simply flush it out and die of dehydration. To stop this, you must perform a fecal transplant. The concept sounds insane, but it dates back nearly 2,000 years to ancient Chinese medicine, where it was called yellow soup. You need a donor, someone in your group who is healthy and has solid digestion. You take a small amount of their fresh stool and mix it with warm water or saline solution to create a slurry. You then filter this mixture through a cloth to remove the solid particulate, leaving only the liquid, which is now teeming with billions of healthy, beneficial bacteria. Using a tube or an improvised syringe, this fluid is administered into the sick person's colon via an enema. It bypasses the stomach acid and goes straight to the source of the infection. Once inside, the healthy bacteria from the donor act like a reinforcement army. They immediately begin to recolonize the gut, fighting off the infection and restoring the mucus lining. It is disgusting, dangerous, and desperate. But in clinical settings, this method has a success rate higher than some modern drugs. When the choice is between dignity and death, you choose the one that keeps you breathing. Sleep deprivation hallucinations. If you are scavenging in an urban or suburban environment, every abandoned home is secretly a hunting supply store, provided you are willing to tear down the walls. While traditional hunters rely on expensive steel cable, the survivalist knows that the electrical grid is built on the perfect material for catching dinner: solid core copper wire. Inside the walls of almost every modern structure runs Romex cabling. If you rip this out and slice open the plastic sheathing, you will find 3 distinct wires. You want the bare ground wire or the insulated ones, provided they are solid metal, not the stranded, hair-like kind found in extension cords. This wire is arguably superior to string or fishing line for one specific reason: memory. When you make a loop with string, it flops over and closes. When you make a loop with copper wire, it stays open. You can shape it into a perfect circle, and it will hold that shape against the wind and rain until an animal disturbs it. To build the snare, you take a 2-foot length of wire, twisted a tiny loop at one end to create an eyelet. Feed the other end of the wire through this eyelet to create a sliding noose. Because copper is malleable, the slide is smooth and fast. You anchor the free end to a heavy root or a stake driven into the ground. Then, you suspend the loop over a game trail, a small beaten path used by rabbits or squirrels. You want the loop about 3 fingers off the ground. When the animal walks through, the loop passes over its ears and catches around the neck. As it panics and pulls away, the copper cinches tight. Unlike a spring trap, it doesn't require bait or complex triggers. It is a passive machine that works 24 hours a day while you are sleeping or doing other work. Sleep deprivation hallucinations. Going without sleep is not a test of endurance. It is a physiological slide into madness. After 48 hours awake, you are no longer surviving the environment. You are surviving your own brain. Most people think of hallucinations as pink elephants or swirling colours, like a drug trip. Survival hallucinations are far more dangerous because they are subtle and terrifyingly real. They usually start with peripheral motion. You swear you see a figure dart behind a tree, or a wolf stalking you in the tall grass. You turn your head and nothing is there. This happens because your brain is desperate for REM sleep. When you deny it rest, it forces the issue. It begins to overlay dream imagery onto your waking vision. This is called REM intrusion. You are technically dreaming while your eyes are wide open. As the deprivation deepens, the shadow people arrive. This is a nearly universal phenomenon among exhausted survivors. seeing dark, human-shaped silhouettes standing at the edge of the camp. The real lethality comes from how you react to them. A hallucinating survivor doesn't just watch, they act. You might waste your precious ammunition shooting at a stump you think is an intruder. You might wander away from the safety of the fire to follow a rescue voice that isn't there. You might step off a cliff because your brain painted a bridge over the gap. There is no way to power through this. Caffeine won't fix it. Willpower won't stop it. The only cure is to close your eyes. Even a 20-minute nap can reset the neurochemistry enough to distinguish a tree from a monster. In the wild, sleep is not a luxury for the lazy, it is a tactical necessity for the sane. The freeze instinct. When a disaster strikes, the majority of people do not panic or run, they simply do nothing. This phenomenon, known as the freeze instinct or normalcy bias, is the single biggest killer in active shooter events, sinking ships, and fires. We are trained by Hollywood to expect chaos, people screaming and stampeding the moment danger appears. But real-life survival footage shows the opposite. When the alarm goes off or the gunshots start, most people look at each other. They finish their drinks. They wait for someone else to tell them what to do. They are effectively paralyzed by their own social conditioning. This happens because the human brain is a prediction machine. It expects the world to be normal. When something catastrophic happens, the brain rejects the new reality because it doesn't fit the pattern. It spends precious seconds or even minutes trying to convince itself that the gunshot is just a firework or the smoke is just a burnt toast. This delay is fatal. In the Twin Towers on September 11th, survivors reported seeing colleagues turning off their computers and putting on their coats before heading to the stairs, as if it were the end of a normal workday. To survive, you have to break this trance. You must train yourself to act immediately on imperfect information. If you hear a loud bang, don't look around to see if others are reacting. If you smell smoke, don't wait for the alarm. You also have to be rude. The social pressure to not make a scene or look foolish keeps people glued to their seats. You must be willing to be the first person to stand up, shout, and sprint toward the exit. It is better to feel embarrassed for overreacting than to die quietly, because you were waiting for permission to live. Active listening negotiation. If you are staring down the barrel of a gun held by a desperate survivor, your instinct will be to beg, scream, or argue. All three of these reactions will likely get you killed because they feed the attacker's adrenaline. To survive a human threat without pulling a trigger yourself, you must use a psychological weapon developed by the FBI called active listening. The goal is not to win the argument. It is to chemically alter the brain of the person holding the weapon. When someone is violent, their amygdala, the lizard brain, is in control. They are operating on pure emotion and instinct. They literally cannot process logic or reason. Your job is to switch their control center back to the rational part of their brain, the prefrontal cortex. You do this by forcing them to think. The primary technique is called mirroring. When they shout a demand, simply repeat the last 3 words they said back to them as a question. If they scream, "I need your supplies right now," you calmly say, "My supplies right now." It sounds stupid, but it is biologically effective. It forces their brain to pause and rephrase their demand to explain it to you. This act of rephrasing requires cognitive effort, which momentarily dampens their aggression. Combine this with labeling. Do not say "calm down," which is a command that challenges their authority. Instead, validate their state. Say, "It seems like you are really desperate," or "It sounds like you've had a hard time." By identifying their emotion, you make them feel understood rather than threatened. Keep your voice low, slow, and soothing, the late-night FM DJ voice. If you can keep them talking for 10 minutes, their adrenaline will naturally crash and the finger on the trigger will relax just enough for you to negotiate a way out.